Okay, so welcome back to the Resolution Room, where we explore how people, organisations, and communities handle conflict and change, and what that teaches us about working and living together more effectively. Today's episode is about journeys, how people find their way into mediation, often through very different paths. With me are two guests who have built long and fascinating careers around people, workplaces, and communication. Jim McCabe is Director for Site Human Resource Consultant, which he co-founded over 20 years ago after working in the Equality Commission. And joining him is Janice Irvine, Founder and Director at Leaning In, who brings more than 3 decades of HR experience from steel industry to her mediation practice today. Janice and Jim are both also new associate mediators here with us here at Mediation NI. Together we're going to talk about how their professional paths have shaped their approaches to conflict and what mediation looks like through an HR lens. Firstly then, Jim, just when you first stepped into HR, what drew you in? Was it the people, the policy, or just the circumstances?
Well, I suppose my first job after finishing education, it had a link to HR without being strictly HR. I worked in the Equality Commission, or as it was then, the Fair Employment Commission. And I was really attracted to the work of the Fair Employment Commission because I believed in what they were doing. I worked in the Advice and Information Department of the Fair Employment Commission, which meant my principal responsibilities were training employers, trade unions and other organisations in relation to equality legislation and advising those same types of organisations regarding issues relative to equality. And at the time, Fair Employment Commission, it wasn't without controversy. There was, the legislation was quite high profile at the time, and this was a time when workplaces could have been festooned with flags and emblems, when there were lots of cases of direct discrimination going to the Fair Employment Tribunal. So that was the thing that principally got me on the road to HR. But initially I was working in the field of equality before I moved on to a broader HR role. I was working with HR departments a lot of the time when I was with the Equality Commission. And so that gave me a taste for moving into a broader HR role, but I was with the Commission for about 5 years.
And Janice, your path couldn't have been more different, really. Yet you've both ended up in the same place, working with people in conflict.
Yeah, absolutely, Bobby. For me, when I started in the steel industry, my role was as PA to the finance director, and then short time later it was with to the MD as well, and there was a HR facilitation role within that. But over time, I became the HR manager and administration manager for Ireland, and I got insights into senior leaderships and the challenges and responsibilities of that role, and then into that management role myself when I took on the HR administration. So.
Yeah, two very different routes there, sort of into it, but the same theme, people before the process. You've both worked through big shifts in workplace and culture. Jim in the public sector dealing with major change, and Janice in a fast-paced industrial world. These early experiences really shape how you see conflict.
Yeah, that's certainly very much the case. As I explained a moment ago, Bobby, at the time that I started working in the Equality Commission, it wasn't without controversy. It wasn't university supported for all sorts of reasons, and in some ways it was tied up with the politics of Northern Ireland. So this was a time of significant change, and the change was driven to some extent by equality legislation, by the role of the Fair Employment Commission, by the role of the Fair Employment Tribunal. Employers understood that if they were found guilty of discrimination, then that's going to result in significant implications for them at the Fair Employment Tribunal. The Fair Employment Tribunal, at the time, initially it had the authority to award a maximum of £30,000 of compensation in a case. However, the maximum was lifted, and the tribunal then had the authority to award unlimited compensation. And this was driving really significant change in terms of workplace behaviours. And there were lots of high-profile cases involving local councils, involving high-profile private sector organisations, and it really was organisations were having to think twice about things that they would have done easily with impunity up to that point. So yeah, it was about conflict, and it was about a significant changes happening at that time.
And when then changes come in, did you see a big sort of influx of volume of cases that you were dealing with?
Absolutely. I mean, there was principally the 1976 Fair Employment Act, which was important but it didn't have the sort of powers that were really required to, bring about the changes that was necessary. Then with the 1989 Fair Employment Act, that piece of legislation had so much more teeth, and it started to drive significant changes, many more cases to the tribunal. The commission, the Fair Employment Commission, had so many more powers in the original Fair Employment Agency, and employers had no choice other than to take on board. Of course, employers started to realise as well that equality of opportunity made very good sense from a commercial, from an organisational point of view. So that was also that understanding was driving the change.
Yeah, and Janice, in the steel industry, I would imagine that conflict wasn't as much about sort of different personalities, more about the processes that were in place. Would that be accurate?
Yeah, I'd agree, Bobby. And when I look back at my career when I first started and the organisation as it was actually founded in 1967. It was privatised in 1988, and so there was a lot of bureaucratic structure. And the part of the business that I worked in was distribution and stockholding, and there was a number of sites on the island of Ireland. When I first joined, there was about 14 different trading entities. We had about 550 employees, and when I left the organisation, we had one site on the island and under 50 employees. So a lot of change happened in my career within that space, and actually with that change and what change brings, the conflict, the uncertainty.
Yes, I mean, it's very different sectors, but the same sort of discovery. People drive performance before policy does. So at some point, HR wasn't enough. You both decided to dig a bit deeper and, look at what actually sits underneath conflict. You both trained as mediators with Mediation now, which feels like the moment everything changed for both of you, really.
Yeah, well, I suppose if I can take a step back, as I said, when I was working with the Fair Employment Commission, I was working with a lot of HR teams and HR departments and other organisations, and that sort of created interest for me in working in HR, in a broader HR role than just the area of equality. And I got a job with a HR consultancy. I suppose I had two principal reasons for taking the job. One was I realised that I was going to have an opportunity to have a really good apprenticeship in HR and a consultancy with lots of things that I'd be doing. And also there was a car with the job. So I thought that was definitely a good idea that I should take that opportunity. So I moved into HR, and I've been working in HR now for more than 25 years. I found myself becoming increasingly frustrated with some HR processes, because some of the time, and Janice, you remember this yourself, some of the time you're dealing with workplace grievances, you're dealing with workplace investigations, and of course those things have their place, but they're a bit of a zero-sum game in that there are winners and there are losers. And I just thought there had to be a better way of dealing with these sorts of things. The way the tribunal works, the industrial tribunal works, was changed a number of years ago to prevent it being gummed up with lots and lots of cases. And we started to talk more about alternative dispute resolution, or ADR. And I thought, well, if it's good enough for the tribunal, then it should be good enough for employers as well. So rather than simply dealing with workplace conflict by traditional routes of grievance, workplace investigation, I thought mediation was a better way of taking some of those cases forward. And I thought, well, I better go and learn how to do this properly. So that's really when my journey with mediation started, and I came along to Mediation NI last year, and I trained as a mediator. So that's really where it all started for me in terms of seeing a different way of dealing with these sorts of issues.
Yeah, it seems to have flicked the switch with both of you, and you've sort of came back looking at conflict a bit differently.
Yeah, for me, my first introduction into mediation was through the LRA, and I was really impressed how resolving that disagreement was so non-adversarial, and I just felt for me it kind of introduced me to a new way of thinking. As Jim says, the traditional grievances and disciplinaries and the effects of those on individuals. So I read about Mediation Northern Ireland and the training that they provided in the theory and practice. And for me, when I actually went through that training, it you had the theory, but it was the practical element of it that really was insightful for me. So you had the role play, you played the mediator, you played the party. You could really get into that role if you wanted to. But it actually really helped me to understand the actual theory behind mediation. And that's just has kept me going. It's helped me then into where I want to be today.
Reflecting back on the training that I did with Mediation NI last year, it's an 8-day course. And what was one of the most insightful things for me was an exercise we did on day one around conflict. This is the one where we all have to position ourselves around a chair in relation to how we have dealt or how we've responded to conflict in our lives at various points along our lives or throughout our lives. And it was really very insightful for me in terms of thinking about how I would have dealt with conflict, how I deal with conflict now. And it sounds like such a simple exercise, but it was something that was really very insightful. And it was interesting that on day one of the mediation theory and practice training that we're delivering now, that I'm helping deliver to trainees now, some of the trainees said the same thing, that exercise really was very insightful and very thought-provoking for them, and it was useful to think about how I would have dealt with conflict up to that point.
Yeah, like I say, you're delivering or starting to be a trainer on that mediation theory and practice course. Is there still elements that you're learning or picking up on now that you're delivering the course rather than being a participant on it?
Yeah, I'm not sure how much of this I want to admit to, but yeah, absolutely. It's an 8-day course. I'm really lucky in that I'm delivering the training with Stefania. Stefania is an experienced mediator, an experience in delivering that 8-day course. And the course, in many respects, for me, has been about delivering the training, but it's also been about learning. Okay, and learning from other people in terms of what mediation is about for them. So absolutely, it's very much a learning experience. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean it's something that we hear sort of all the time, that people come for the qualification and then they leave with saying how it's changed, how they listen, how they lead, and even how they sort of conduct themselves in other aspects of their life.
Yeah.
But if we fast forward to now, you're both part of Mediation NI's associate team, working directly with organisations and communities. You were both drawn back here into the organisation, not just to deliver the training, but to be part of the wider culture of dialogue. What's that look like for you now on from a work perspective?
Yeah, I suppose for me, I haven't gone through the training with Mediation Northern Ireland, and then meeting the team at other events, I just became, I just really kind of wanted to support what it is, the commitment that they make to resolving conflict, to dialogue, and just educating people in those skills. And I just felt when the opportunity came up to be an associate, it was something that I wanted to, I grasped. Yeah, it was.
Yeah. I think you have to be realistic as a mediator. You have to be realistic about what mediation can achieve, and sometimes the maximum that can be achieved as a result of mediation is a pragmatic resolution to a dispute, rather than necessarily people thinking, "God, haven't we been so silly? We should go back to having the great relationship that we once did."
Yeah.
So there has to be, as I said, there has to be a realism in terms of what mediation can achieve. And one of the ways of trying to get people to think positively about, what can be achieved by mediation is getting them to shift from their position, sort of a sort of unbending position that they have, to think instead about their interests and their needs. Okay, so this is your position. You may feel strongly, you may be emotionally tied to this position, but what do you need? What are your interests? And what are your needs going forward that allow this situation to be moved forward in conjunction with the person you're in dispute with? Of course, there are occasions when the blinkers will be lifted from people's eyes and they will be able to move back perhaps to the relationship that they had before the conflict occurred. But one of the things that certainly has been come apparent to me is that we have to be, mediation is a brilliant way of dealing with conflict in many ways. We have to be realistic about what can be achieved through mediation.
Yeah, and I think being an associate, working coming from an organisation where I worked for a long period of time, knowing the individuals, and then being an associate with Mediation Northern Ireland, and that really being independent was a key aspect for me that I wanted to develop within my own practice. And because sometimes it is hard. I found myself, when you're in that situation, in a workplace situation, to feel you are being totally independent.
Yeah, I mean, the transition between HR advisor to mediator is really interesting to me. They're two different very mindsets. One facilitates and the other one fixes. So, when you're going from one hat to the other, how do you find that sort of transition?
I found it tricky, actually, because in HR, there's such a percentage of it is about investigating. And that's the thing that comes naturally to you. You go into trying to work out what the problem is, trying to fix it. And in mediation, that's not what we do. We can't fix it. It's facilitating those conversations.
Yeah, I'd very much echo what Janice is saying there. Working in a HR consultancy, essentially people are paying me to come in and sort a problem out, saying this is our problem. How do we solve this problem? And that's just not what you do in mediation. And that did take a little bit of a mind shift for me to understand that. And I fully understand it now. The process is the most important thing when it comes to mediation. What we're doing is facilitating a process that allows people to reach the answer themselves. We can't impose a solution. We can't even really suggest a solution, because then it's not the solution of the parties that are in conflict. Which means they may not be really fully, sold on the outcome if it's not their outcome. So really, this is very much about facilitating a process where other people, resolve their own problems. Again, I'm going back to my own mediation theory and practice training. I remember on day one being told that it's not our problem, so it can't be our solution. Okay, we've got to facilitate somebody else's solution, and that took a little bit of a mind shift. But when you do, when you understand that's what you're at, it really influences your approach.
I haven't taken the course myself. That's one of the things that I noticed, and you still notice now, but as we're running the courses, that through different stages on different days of the course, people, that switch will flick and they'll go, yeah, it's not my problem, so it's not up to me to come for, to come up with a solution.
I remember even on the first day of the course, and again, Janice, you get this, as a HR practitioner, your notes are like everything to you. Your notes and notes and notes and notes. That's your sort of your protective administration, as I like to call it, because that's the way of establishing what was said, when it was said, and who said it. But that's not the approach. When it's a mediator, you're not taking all those copious notes. Instead, you're trying to facilitate people talking, and you don't want to do anything that's going to put them off talking. I have to admit that I maybe still take more notes than the average mediator, but I'm getting better, I think.
Yeah, and it's listening to understand, really actively listening. And I think for the parties to actually see that that's what's actually happening, and I think the other thing that was sort of like a light bulb moment for me within the training was around the negotiation that happens. And, how traditionally, you mentioned it earlier about the win-lose, and just how if we can think about the alternative, so I see you, you see me, but then what actually happens when we see each other, what's happening, and asking those questions to try and understand in a deeper way what's going on with the other party. And I think, if one party can do that, there's an influence then that the other party can actually respond the same way.
Yeah, it's brilliant hearing that, that because it shows that mediation is something that's live. It's not just theoretical. It's people learning and new ways to talk, even in the hardest circumstances. We've talked about systems and organizations, but mediation always comes back to people, emotion, trust, and timing. Rebuilding trust sounds like a slow process. One moment it can shift the whole dynamic. Is there any cases that you've dealt with, in your short time as mediators that sort of spring to mind that would sort of embody that?
Yeah, there are several cases. What you're always looking for, what you're always hoping to see as a mediator, are hidden offers. or even not even hidden offers, explicit offers, where people are indicating either directly or indirectly that they want to resolve this, that they don't want to continue fighting, that they're looking for a resolution to the conflict. And there's a case that I'm dealing with at the moment where certainly one party who appears who could be really upset with the behaviour of another person is now indicating just through their language that they understand that they had a good relationship with this person previously, and this is, it may not be possible to find the way back to this, but they want to stop. They want to sort of move back from the unhealthy situation that they find themselves in at this point. So when people start to talk like that, it's not necessarily rehearsed. They're not even necessarily doing it consciously, but nonetheless, they're creating an understanding for you as the mediator that this is something they want to find a solution to, and I can see that developing in this case that I'm talking about at the moment.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the real crafts of mediations, creating that calm, safe space where people can actually start listening to the issues, before they, start talking about them.
Yeah, and it especially when you're in those single meetings with the party, and they're getting the opportunity for the first time to talk about the thing that's really affecting the conflict, and having that safe space for them to actually hear them say. Them actually say the words, and also to hear them back when the mediator is doing that summarising, and it's very powerful for to be heard.
Yeah, that's actually extremely important. There's one thing that you need to achieve as a mediator. It's there's lots of things you need to achieve as a mediator, but if there's one thing that certainly I'm conscious of, is that the party needs to know that they have been heard. When you're doing that by echoing, by paraphrasing, by your body language, all those sorts of things. And I don't mean you're getting in and doing that robotically. You're going in and you're conscious of the importance of doing that, so the party at the end of that, understands that you have heard what their concerns are.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's fascinating. I mean, what you're both describing, sort of empathy in action. Mm-hmm. It's not soft. It's a skill that makes everything else work.
Yeah, I was at a conference recently, and the speaker said that mediators, they make peace, not war, and it is that compassion and empathy that mediators bring to the environment when they're mediating, and I really like that.
Mm-hmm. So what about the road ahead then for both of you? Workplaces now look nothing like they did sort of 20, 25 years ago. We've now got hybrid teams, well-being pressures and generational gaps. The challenges are shifting, but the need for real dialogue hasn't gone away. So what do you think the future brings?
I have a lot of thought about hybrid working and remoteness, and I suppose it goes back to what I observed when I was working within the steel industry, and we had a hub, but we also had remote sites, and what you saw is the more remote the site or the team is, the risk of disconnection, and you have to work really hard to communicate consistently, so people actually know that there's transparency. And some of the things that we try to do is actually get people to visit the site or visit customers, so that and it's the same in mediation, if hybrid working, people not turning their cameras on. How do you know what's going on if you actually can't see the person? And that makes conflict become more embedded and hard to deal with.
Yeah, I suppose my answer to that would relate to how busy Mediation NI finds itself at this point in terms of what the road ahead is. As I've mentioned already, we have 15 people on our mediation theory and practice course this autumn. The services in terms of delivering training are in significant demand. I know that we are making alignments with other organisations to provide mediation services to them. So the road ahead seems to be very busy, because mediation is becoming more significant, and not just a reactive, but a more significant proactive part of workplace cultures. People are coming here to be trained. They're asking us to deliver training to their staff on site, and we're involved in mediation, delivering mediation services every day of the week. So the road ahead seems like a very busy one.
And I think actually learning the skills of a mediator, for me, if I think back to when I did the theory and practice, I didn't work as a mediator. I used the skills of mediation in the workplace. When you're having discussions with individuals, and that active listening, communication, on trying to understand, not trying to fix, all the things that, and that's really, I think, the more people who can understand the skills of mediation or mediating, the easier it's going to be, the quicker it's going to be for and line managers play such a critical role in that. And I think Mediation Northern Ireland training line managers, but it's the practice. That's what I feel.
Yeah.
You can come and you can do the theory and the practice and what you feel, Jim, but you can do all that, but you've got to go out and have the safety to practice it. And I think that's the big thing for line managers. They need to be able to practice what they've learned.
Yeah.
HR can support that.
Yeah, it's not just about becoming a trained mediator. Like I say, it's additional tools that you're putting into your toolkit so that you can deal with everyday circumstances in the workplace.
Well, people attending the course, the MTP training, they typically bring lots of transferable skills with them.
Yeah.
I've met other HR people, I've met barristers, I've met lawyers, I've met counsellors on the training, so they're bringing a lifetime of transferable skills. And then what we're helping them with is the theory, but everybody needs, you need to practice. And certainly my journey into mediation was assisted by the fact that whenever I'd finished my training, I was able to shadow a number of trained, and experienced mediators. And then myself and Janice, of course, we did a joint and a shuttle mediation earlier on this year, which was challenging on lots of levels. But these are opportunities to hone your skills, and anybody who's going to work as a mediator, the training having the transferable skills is fantastic. The training certainly does not make you the finished article. You need to get experience at being involved. And a very experienced mediator said to me just a couple of weeks ago that theory is very, very important, but then when the rubber hits the road and you're actually getting involved in mediations, you gotta be able to think on your feet and take those transferable skills that you have from other aspects of your life.
Yeah, and I would echo what Jim says about that experience, observing experienced mediators. It's constantly learning. For myself, I just feel I need to keep learning and keep observing, keep getting involved. But it's some of those it's the emotions that come into the room when we're mediating and actually having, and that's why Jim mentioned there we work together, and I really do value the co-mediation that MNI design, and that to me, because sometimes my emotions come into the room, and if you've got a co-mediator, they're actually picking up on those and bringing a balance to the mediation as well.
Yeah, and I think the road ahead is also it's a developing road for MNI, because the history of this organisation is very much one which was involved in peace building and conflict resolution, and those sorts of community issues that would really have required the skills of a mediator. But for all sorts of reasons, we're evolving and we're moving in different directions, and we're becoming involved with many different types of organisations who previously may not have thought of mediation as an option. Obviously, we're getting involved with private sector organisations because the notion of mediation is becoming just a much greater significance. Yeah,
and it's catching the conflict early, and I think that report that was done about the cost of mediation, and I think it's something like £1 billion it costs the Northern Ireland economy, and that's through employees leaving the organisation, recruiting, absence management, all those different elements that cost, and the loss of productivity as a result of that. So addressing conflict early, performance, productivity improves, and it is, as Jim said earlier, a win-win situation.
And I think that report, Janice, that was about the cost of conflict.
Cost of conflict,
of conflict,
yes. Sorry.
Yeah, I mean, it is something that we are seeing, that sort of active shift away from mediation being, a response to a crisis to, being part of everyday leadership.
Yeah, and HR, going back to the transition, but HR is the catalyst for opening those discussions for difficult conversations and addressing it very early on in the process before it becomes embedded and the parties start to lose control over their dispute.
Yeah. I think personally a big part of it is raising that awareness with the HR teams, because they are the ones on the front line that are dealing with the issues and the conflicts as they arise. So it's making them aware of the changes that they can make, albeit slight, to take things and nip it in the bud when it first starts, rather than just going straight to a grievance.
It's really important that it becomes embedded in the HR culture. An understanding of mediation and the option of mediation is embedded in the HR departments, so we're not instantaneously jumping for the grievance policy to resolve a dispute. I'm dealing with an organisation at the moment, a department in this organisation, 20 employees, and currently they have 8 grievances ongoing. That's just simply unsustainable. In terms of the time lost, in terms of the commercial implications of the organisation, it's just unsustainable to continue like that. So there has to be a change in workplace culture that, so people understand that we don't reach for the grievance procedure first. There are other ways of dealing with this.
Yeah. Well, listen, unfortunately we're getting towards the end of the show, but one last question for you both. Just after decades of working with people, what's the biggest lesson that conflict has taught you both?
I think, to me, it's that the conflict can have a positive outcome. When we hear the word conflict, we immediately think negative. Okay, we think, and that can be as a result of our experiences with conflict, throughout our lives, the things that have shaped us. But conflict, if handled properly, can move. It can result in people moving to a better place. Conflict can have a positive outcome.
Yeah, I'd agree, Jim, and it helps innovation. If you have debate, you have healthy debate in teams, cross teams, conflict can be seen as positive. But the impact of conflict not being addressed is enormous. And I think for me, the thing that conflict has taught me is just how the brain works in conflict and the emotions that come to the fore very, very quickly. And it's recognizing those. I feel, when the more you understand about conflict, the more you can feel the reaction within your body. So yeah, that's what it's taught me is what's going on even inside myself, and then you're able to see that in other individuals, and that can be helpful.
And Janice and Jim, thank you both for your time and your stories and your insights. It's been fascinating hearing about your journeys through HR to mediation and how they've unfolded, and what they reveal about how workplaces can change for the better. Every conversation we have on this podcast reminds me that mediation isn't just a profession, it's a way of seeing people. As workplaces and communities evolve, so does the need for dialogue. What we've heard today is that conflict isn't necessarily the problem, avoidance of conflict is. The more we learn to meet it early with openness and skill, the stronger our relationships become. To our listeners, you can find out more about our courses, workplace mediation and community projects at mediationni.org, or get in touch if you'd like to bring training to your team. I'm Bobby Marno, and this has been the Resolution Room. Thanks for listening, and remember, dialogue changes everything.
Thank you.
Thanks, Bobby.